let's quickly break down the Halloween timeline, because it's one of the most complicated timelines of any franchise. Halloween 1 comes out in 1978. It's just called Halloween. First movie in the franchise, obviously incredibly important, and then they make a bunch more. A couple years later, they make Halloween 2 and kill off Michael Myers. Next up, they make Halloween 3, which is a completely separate thing. John Carpenter had this idea to take the series in a completely different direction, make it more of an anthology series, so that like every movie would be a completely different, unrelated horror story that happens to take place on Halloween. And so we get Halloween 3, Season of the Witch. Completely unrelated to the Michael Myers stuff, the first two movies, and no one liked it, and it didn't make very much money. So that was the end of that idea. Which brings us to Halloween 4, Return of Michael Myers, which is technically a sequel to Halloween 2. In this one, even though both Michael Myers and Dr. Loomis exploded in a fire at the end of 2, they're both just alive again in this one, but they couldn't get Jamie Lee Curtis back, so she died in a car accident, and this one is about her daughter who now exists, and Michael Myers is going after her. Yeah, because also in Halloween 2, there's like a line where they establish that Jamie Lee Curtis is secretly Michael Myers' sister, even though that wasn't a thing at all in the first one, and that's why he's always after her and stuff. It's weird because not only is it not at all a thing in the first one, it's barely a thing in the second one. Jamie Lee Curtis never finds out that Michael is her secret brother, and it is never apparent that Michael even knows that, so it just seems like he's just kind of killing people, and like Jamie Lee Curtis ends up being the last one that he's after because she lives the longest, and that's it. They have almost zero connection in the first two movies, even the second one where they do technically establish that they're related, but then it's like a thing for like most of the rest of the series. So after 4, we get Halloween 5, which is like the Revenge of Michael Myers, and Halloween 6, I think, is the Curse of Michael Myers. Just continuing that saga. Michael Myers kills some more people. It's the same thing again a bunch more times. And then the franchise like kind of dug itself into a hole. They had this whole weird subplot with the cult that they just like didn't really know what to do with. Also, Donald Pleasance, who plays Dr. Loomis, had died by this point, so they like the one main character who had been in like all the movies other than Michael Myers, like they couldn't use anymore. So they're kind of like, shit, what do we do now? And that brings us to, I don't like this. Okay, wait, hold on. I'm ruining my own map because I don't like where I placed that. Okay, we're gonna go up here actually. So we have 1998's Halloween H2o, which takes place 20 years after the first one, as you can see from the title and the fact that it came out in 1998. The first one came out in 1978. And here they do a bunch of retcons. First of all, it's a sequel again, just straight to 2. They're ignoring 4, 5, and 6, and also 3, which is a different thing. So after 2, Laurie Strode faked her death and went into hiding. She has a different name, and she also has a son. So again, another different kid that she has. And then Michael Myers comes back and is after them. Oh yeah, and they brought back Jamie Lee Curtis. But normally Michael Myers gets away. Not in this one. Jamie Lee Curtis fucking chops his head off with an axe, and it's great. So the series is finally over, and we get like a somewhat satisfying conclusion, right? No. A couple of years later, they do a sequel to Halloween H2o. It's called Resurrection, I think, but we're just gonna call it H2o 2 to make things more confusing. I think at that point, Jamie Lee Curtis was like, okay, fuck it, kill me off, because I don't want to do these anymore. I thought the whole point of the last one was to end it, so whatever. And yeah, it turns out Michael Myers is still alive, so fuck it. Then a few years after that, they did a remake, and we're gonna put that over here. Call that H1Z, which sounds like some kind of flu, but it's designated that because it's the Rob Zombie remake of the first movie, completely separate from the other movies. And then they do a sequel to that a couple years later, H2Z. So just that's part of it. And then just a couple years ago, in 2018, we get what I'm calling H2o, which ignores all the sequels, even 2, which most of them kept. So it's just the first movie, and then this one on this other new timeline that we've created. And this one's just called Halloween. I'm gonna label it H2o because it takes place 40 years after the original. And what'd you know, Laurie has another kid. This time it's Judy Greer, who plays the mom in everything. And she also has a kid, and it's about that. And so that's 3 different timelines where Laurie Strode has 3 different kids that are all characters in this franchise. Obviously, they brought back Jamie Lee Curtis again, and did they finally end the series once and for all? No, they're doing 2 more sequels. Halloween Kills, which was supposed to come out this year, but due to the pandemic, it obviously got pushed back. And then Halloween Ends, which is said to be the final one. You know, just like 2, 7, and 6 were. So, you know, we've seen how that fucking goes. I think Jamie Lee Curtis is back for all these, but we'll see. She quits horror movies every few years, but then also comes back to do Halloween movies every few years, so who knows. Yeah, so that's the Halloween franchise timeline. It's very simple and straightforward, as you can see. There's 1, 2, 3, 4.5 different timelines, all spinning off from different movies. And it's really simple and straightforward. Let's talk about Freddy vs. Jason for a minute, because I think it's actually one of the most important and one of the greatest missed opportunities of the entire horror genre. So, Freddy vs. Jason, obviously a big crossover movie putting together Jason Voorhees from Friday the 13th and Freddy Krueger from Nightmare on Elm Street, 2 of the biggest horror slasher franchises of the 80s. The coolest thing about this movie is obviously it's this big crossover event that puts these 2 different characters together into one mythology. These things that you thought were separate are now part of a greater universe. You probably see where I'm going with this. But did you know that Freddy vs. Jason almost had a sequel? It was going to be called Freddy vs. Jason vs. Ash. That's right, Ash from the Evil Dead series almost crossed over with Freddy vs. Jason. I think there was a problem with the rights to using all these different characters. The Evil Dead series itself kind of jumped around studios a couple times, which is why the 3rd one wasn't even called Evil Dead. But if this did happen, that would mean that there's 3 franchises in play. And they actually set this up all the way back in Jason Goes to Hell. There was a Easter egg of the Necronomicon from the Evil Dead series in Jason Goes to Hell, which is also the movie that sets up Freddy vs. Jason. So that's 2 Easter eggs connecting to the Evil Dead series. Alright, now this gets more complicated. So in one of the early scripts of Freddy vs. Jason, there was an end credits scene in which both Freddy and Jason die, and they end up in hell, and they meet Pinhead from Hellraiser, bringing in an entire other franchise. Now, what's interesting about Hellraiser is that, at least at the time, it was owned by Miramax, which is essentially what used to be the Weinstein Company. So just keep that in the back of your head. But yeah, obviously this was a different era. But one of the other interesting things about Miramax is they produced all of Kevin Smith's films. Kevin Smith is even talked about that at one point he had a conversation with Bob Weinstein about potentially crossing over Jay and Silent Bob with some of the horror characters that they owned, which included Hellraiser, it included Halloween, I think they mentioned Children of the Corn as well. This obviously never ended up becoming anything, but at the same time, Kevin Smith thought that's kind of a stupid idea, but it's also kind of hilarious, and people would probably go to see that. I definitely would. So let's talk about Jay and Silent Bob for a second, because there's actually more connections here than you would first expect. So Jay and Silent Bob, potential connection to something like Hellraiser or even Halloween, which you have over here from our last map. As you may already know, Jay and Silent Bob, characters from Kevin Smith's movies, and they actually show up in almost all of his movies, which connects them in what he calls the View Askew universe, something like that. And this is where I started to put the pieces together of one of the things that's super appealing to me about horror movies, is they're just like comic book movies. The potential connection to Jay and Silent Bob activated the comic book portion of my brain that made me go, it's a shared universe. I understand it now. It's all part of the same thing. So Jay and Silent Bob obviously starred in a bunch of their own movies, Clerks, Mallrats, Dogma, Chasing Amy, and then they got their own movie, Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. And in that one, Jay and Silent Bob go to Hollywood, where they meet Wes Craven, who is filming a Scream movie. So we're gonna put a thing over there. Whoops, I almost spelled that wrong. For the Scream franchise. Now, again, in Scream 3, Jay and Silent Bob have a cameo. So they show up in the Scream movie, which directly connects the View-Askew universe, so all of Kevin Smith's movies, with the Scream franchise. So that's 4 more movies that are all connected to Jay and Silent Bob, which has potential connections to both Hellraiser and the Halloween franchise. Now, Scream, I believe here, is the key to all of this. The whole concept of Scream is that it takes place in a universe that's very similar to our own, in which all the characters are very aware of horror movies and horror movie tropes. They talk about how you can't have sex or you'll die, and they constantly are referencing other horror movies, including Halloween, Friday the 13th, and Nightmare on Elm Street. Obviously, Nightmare on Elm Street was also directed by Wes Craven, who is the director of Scream as well. They even watched the first Halloween movie in the first Scream as like a sort of callback to all of the horror genre as a whole. One of the big slasher movies that kind of started off this whole big genre thing, as well as almost a callback to Halloween itself, where in the movie they're watching another horror movie thing from another world, which would then get later remade by the director John Carpenter. Now, this theme of people watching horror movies in other horror movies would get even more complicated with Halloween H2o, which is all the way over here, but I'm going to put it somewhere over here. Whoop. In which they watch Scream 2, which is incredibly fucking confusing. It doesn't make any goddamn sense, because it means that the Scream movies exist in the Halloween franchise, in that universe. But in the Scream universe, all of the Halloween movies exist. So how the fuck does that make any fucking sense? Also in Halloween H2o, Janet Leigh shows up. Janet Leigh, who you may remember from Psycho, is actually Jamie Lee Curtis's mother, which is why they wanted her in the first place for the first Halloween, all the way back here. Now, what's weird about this is that she's not really like playing a character. Like, she is technically a character, but they don't like do anything with her. She's not like playing Jamie Lee Curtis's mom or something. She's just like in the movie for one scene where she goes, hey Jamie Lee Curtis, it's me, Janet Leigh. She doesn't say that exactly, but it might as well be that. And then she leaves and she goes off to the car from Psycho, and the Psycho theme plays. All these things, Psycho, Halloween, Psycho to Halloween to Scream to the Jay and Silent Bob universe to Halloween again and Hellraiser and Freddy vs. Jason and Ash vs. Evil Dead. All of these are fucking connected, and they're all part of the same mythology and franchise, and I think that's one of the things that excites me about horror movies, is that much like comic book movies, they have the potential to cross over and share universes and all be part of this greater mythology. The whole thing with Jay and Silent Bob and potentially crossing over with Halloween and Hellraiser or whatever was originally inspired by fucking Abbott and Costello, the Who's On First guys. Because back in the day, they were the big funny man, and they started off as like side characters or like a side gimmick in something, and then they eventually got their own movies, and then those movies crossed over with fucking Wolfman and Frankenstein and fucking Dracula. The original horror icons that started it all and had the original first big crossover events in movies, at least. And it's all fucking part of the same mythology. They even tried to do this again with the Dark Universe, and it failed horribly. But at the same time, it's this extra level of like meta trivia and Easter eggs and references. I don't know. There's something there. It's all these different connections and all these long-running franchises that have these long and complicated continuities that reminds me so much of comic books. And even though that's like seems like a turnoff initially, is like, oh, do you want to watch Friday the 13th? There's 12 movies. It actually gets me excited to keep watching more. And the last big connection, which I almost forgot about, is in Freddy vs. Jason. There's a character that is not just similar, but a straight up ripoff of Jay from Jay and Silent Bob.
I mean, it was amazing when they offered this and I went and I played Freebird, and it was like a lifelong dream come... Wait, I didn't play Freebird. I wasn't in that movie.
Connecting this all the way back to Freddy vs. Jason, where all of this started. So yeah, it's all fucking connected. Hi there. So in case you're wondering, this was originally going to be part of a much longer video, but once I actually got to recording it and looking through the edit, it felt to me like it was more just kind of 40 minutes of me rambling about horror movies without any kind of clear, coherent thesis or anything. So I decided to cut it way back and just stick with the parts that I actually like of the video. So that's what this is. The short version is I wanted to kind of take a deep look into horror movies and what it is that I find interesting about them, and try to pinpoint like what specifically has drawn me to horror movies, particularly recently, just the last couple months or so. And I thought it might be the comic book shared universe connection, but then there was also all these other things that I really liked about horror movies, how they showcase female protagonists, how they're really low budget, and a lot of big directors start out directing horror movies, so there's kind of this attainability to them, how most of them are really short, only about an hour and a half, so they're not a huge time commitment. It also makes them much more economical with their storytelling, which I always really like. And so then I started to realize that I don't really have a brilliant hot take on the horror movie genre. More, I just kind of like horror movies. And that's about it. So yeah, here we are. If you do, for some reason, want to see the full like 40-minute version of this video, comment below, I guess. But for me, I decided that I would rather just stick with the stuff that I know I liked and keep the video at just that. Because there's also a bunch of other stuff that I want to work on and spend my time doing. So that's it. Not a huge revelation or anything, just some stuff that I found interesting about horror movies. That's about it. Thank you for watching, and subscribe for more videos. We recently hit 200 subscribers, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it does mean a lot to me. So thank you if you are subscribed. We got a bunch more stuff coming up, and see you next time.